James Francis Edward, Prince of Wales, nicknamed the Old Pretender, was the son of the deposed James II of England and Ireland, VII of Scotland. As such, he claimed the English, Scottish and Irish thrones from the death of his father in 1701, when he was recognised as King of England, Scotland and Ireland by his cousin Louis XIV of France. Following his death in 1766, he was succeeded by his son Charles Edward Stuart in the Jacobite succession. Had his father not been deposed, Great Britain might have had only two monarchs during his lifetime, his father and himself, who were both Roman Catholic. Instead there were seven: his father, William III, Mary II, and George I, George II and George III. Although the ruling Protestant Stuarts died out with his half-sister, Queen Anne, the last remaining Stuarts were James and his sons, and their endeavours to reclaim the throne while remaining devoted to the Catholic faith made the political situation in England precarious. Their attempts are remembered in history as Jacobitism. Birth and childhood. Prince James Francis Edward was born the 10th of June 1688 at St. James's Palace. He was the son of King James II of England and Ireland, and his Roman Catholic second wife, Mary of Modena, and as such was automatically Duke of Cornwall and Duke of Rothesay, among other titles. The prince's birth was controversial, and coming 5 years after James's marriage, unanticipated on the part of a number of British Protestants, who had expected his daughter Mary, from his first marriage, to succeed her father. Mary and her younger sister Princess Anne had been raised as Protestants. As long as there was a possibility of one of them succeeding him, the king's opponents saw his rule as a temporary inconvenience. When people began to fear that James's second wife, Mary, would produce a Catholic son and heir, a movement grew to replace him with his elder daughter Princess Mary and his son-in-law, nephew, William of Orange. When the young prince was born, rumors immediately began to spread that he was an impostor baby, smuggled into the royal birth chamber in a warming pan, and that the true child of James and Mary was allegedly stillborn. In an attempt to scotch this myth, James published the testimonies of over 70 witnesses to the birth. On the 9th of December, in the midst of the Glorious Revolution, Mary of Modena disguised herself as a laundress and escaped with the infant James to France. Young James was brought up at the Château de Saint-Germain-en-Laye, which Louis XIV had turned over to the exiled James II. Both the ex-king and his family were held in great consideration by the French king, and they were frequent visitors at Versailles, where Louis XIV and his court treated them as ruling monarchs. Struggle for the throne. On his father's death in 1701, James was recognized by King Louis XIV of France as the rightful heir to the English and Scottish thrones. Spain, the Papal States and Modena also recognized him as King James III of England and VIII of Scotland, and refused to recognize William III, Mary II or Anne as legitimate sovereigns. As a result of his claiming his father's lost thrones, James was attainted for treason in London on the 2nd of March 1702, and his titles were forfeited under English law. Jacobite Rising. Though delayed in France by an attack of measles, James attempted invasion, trying to land at the Firth of Forth on the 23rd of March 1708. The fleet of Admiral Sir George Byng intercepted the French ships, which combined with bad weather prevented a landing. James served for a time in the French army, as had his father during the interregnum. Between August and September 1710, Queen Anne appointed a new Tory administration led by Robert Harley, who entered into a secret correspondence with de Torcy, the French Minister of Foreign Affairs, in which he claimed to desire James's restoration to the throne should James convert to Protestantism. A year later, however, the British government Stuart pushed for James's expulsion from France as a precondition for a peace treaty with France. In accordance with the Treaty of Utrecht, Harley and Lord Bolingbroke, the Secretary of State, colluded with the French in exiling James to the Duchy of Lorraine. Queen Anne became severely ill at Christmas 1713, and seemed close to death. In January 1714, she recovered, but clearly had not much longer to live. Through de Torcy and his London agent, Abbé François Gautier, Harley kept up the correspondence with James, and Bolingbroke had also entered into a separate correspondence with him. They both stated to James that his conversion to Protestantism would facilitate his restoration. However, James, a devout Catholic, replied to Torcy, "I have chosen my own course, therefore it is for others to change the sentiments." In March came James's refusal to convert, following which Harley and Bolingbroke reached the opinion that James's restoration was not feasible, though they maintained their correspondence with him. As a result, in August 1714, James's second cousin, the Elector of Hanover, George of Hanover, a German-speaking Protestant, became king of the recently created Kingdom of Great Britain as George I. The 15 in the following year, Scottish Jacobites started the 15 Jacobite Rising in Scotland, aimed at putting James III and VIII on the throne. On the 22nd of December 1715, James reached Scotland after the Jacobite defeats at the Battle of Sheriffmuir and Preston. He landed at Peterhead and soon fell ill with fever, his illness made more severe by the icy Scottish winter. In January 1716, he set up court at Scone Palace, but learning of the approach of government forces, returned to France, sailing from Montrose on the 5th of February 1716. The abandonment of his rebel allies caused ill feeling against him in Scotland, nor was he welcomed on his return to France. His patron, Louis XIV, had died on the 1st of September 1715, and the French government found him a political embarrassment. Caught in exile after the unsuccessful invasion of 1715, James lived at Avignon, then papal territory. Pope Clement XI offered James the Palazzo Muti in Rome as his residence, which he accepted. Pope Innocent XIII, like his predecessor, showed much support. Thanks to his friend Cardinal Filippo Antonio Gualterio, James was granted a life annuity of 8,000 Roman scudi. Such help enabled him to organize a Jacobite court at Rome, where although he lived in splendor, he continued to suffer from fits of melancholy and depression. Further efforts to restore the Stuarts to the British throne were planned in 1719 and 1722, but came to nothing. In exercise of his pretended position, James purported to create titles of nobility, now referred to as Jacobite peerages, for his English supporters and members of his court, which clearly were not recognized in England. The court in exile became a popular stop for English travelers making a grand tour, regardless of political affiliation. For many it functioned as an unofficial embassy. Those in need of medical attention preferred being treated by one of their own countrymen. In 1735, court physicians tended to Edmund Sheffield, 2nd Duke of Buckingham and Normanby, and to James Boswell 30 years later. The court wine steward operated a lucrative business in selling rare vintages to visitors. After the Bourbon seized Naples in 1734, an appropriate introduction was essential for anyone wishing entry to an important concert of salon. James remained well treated in Rome until his death. He was allowed to hold Protestant services at court, and was given land where his Protestant subjects could receive a public burial. Security was provided to discourage British spies. Marriage and progeny. Louise Adélaïde d'Orléans, daughter of Philippe II, Duke of Orleans, was at one time suggested as a wife for James Francis Edward Stuart. but nothing came of it. On the 3rd of September 1719, James Francis Edward Stuart married Maria Clementina Sobieska, granddaughter of King John III Sobieski of Poland. The wedding was held in the chapel of the Episcopal Palace in Montefiasco. By his wife he had two sons, Charles Edward Stuart, nicknamed Bonnie Prince Charlie; Henry Benedict Stuart, a cardinal of the Roman Catholic Church. Bonnie Prince Charlie. Following James's failure, attention turned to his son Charles, the young pretender, whose rebellion of 1745 came much closer to success than his father's. With the failure of the Second Rebellion, however, the Stuart hopes of regaining the British throne were effectively destroyed. James and Charles later clashed repeatedly, and relations between them broke down completely when James played a role in the election of his son Henry as a cardinal, infuriating Charles, who had not been consulted. In 1759, the French government briefly considered a scheme to have James crowned King of Ireland as part of the plans to invade Britain, but the offer was never formally made to James. Several separate plans also involved Charles being given control of a French-backed independent Ireland. Death. James died in Rome on the 1st of January 1766, in his home the Palazzo Muti, and was buried in the crypt of St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican City. His burial is marked by the monument to the Royal Stuarts. His claimed reign had lasted for 64 years, 3 months and 16 days, longer than any legitimate British monarch until Queen Elizabeth II surpassed it with her reign on the 23rd of May 2016. End of Papal Support. Following James's death, the Pope refused to recognize the claim to the English throne of his eldest son Charles, and instead from the 14th of January 1766, finally accepted the Hanoverian dynasty as the legitimate rulers of Britain and Ireland. This decision led to a gradual relaxation and reform of the anti-Catholic penal laws in Britain and Ireland. In 1792, the papacy specifically referred to George III as the King of Great Britain and Ireland, which elicited a protest from James's second son Henry, who was then the Jacobite claimant. Titles and honours. James was created Prince of Wales on the 4th of July 1688. Honours: Jacobite KG, Knight of the Garter, 1692 to 1766. Arms. As Prince of Wales, James bore a coat of arms consisting of those of the kingdom, differenced by a label argent of 3 points. Popular cultural depiction. James was portrayed by Freddie Wilson in the highly regarded BBC serial The First Churchill's Ancestry.